and welcome to episode 97 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. My name is Sigmund Judge. I am, of course, joined this week once again by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee. And I think this week we're actually both quite smiley.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a sugar rush. I'm still working through my leftover Halloween candy that I didn't give out. I know last week you were a little bit grumpy because you didn't have as many trick-or-treaters as maybe you were expecting. Are you feeling a little better this week?
I mean, for those that don't know, we just saw Guy Fawkes Night pass. So lots and lots of fireworks everywhere. And no doubt they will carry on until the end of November. But no, I'm not going to be grumpy. Because we have, of course, lots and lots to be positive about. We recap the morning show's triumphant third season, detail the end of the Screen Actors Guild strike and this week's agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, as well as 3D movies in the TV app, and some Tailscale VPN experiments on Apple TV. But we start this week with our highlight, Season 4 of For All Mankind, and who better to break it all down for us than this week's very special guest, my brother from another mother, one of my very favourite people in the world, a space fiend, an Apple aficionado, and still a punk rock kid at heart. We welcome back to Magic Rays of Light, Mr. Zach Hall.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I like that introduction. I'm going to use that everywhere I go now.
It's been a while, so great to have you back. Before we rocket into the new millennium, 8 years since Season 3, here's just a taste of what's to come with the return of Ronald D. Moore, Matt Woolpart, and Ben Navidi's epic space race drama.
This job on Mars, they're looking for guys just like us.
This asteroid is going to secure the future for Earth.
CIA, North Koreans, KGB, they're all wanting a piece of this pie.
Let's take the most valuable known object in our solar system.
How much are you willing to lose?
I'm not going to be the guy that brought back the Cold War.
Tell him to shut it down.
Just to catch everyone up on where we're at coming into Season 4, here's where we left off in Season 3 of For All Mankind. We ended with the attack on the Johnson Space Center, which was partially sparked by unrest over changes in the energy sector. I get the feeling we're going to be talking about energy a lot more throughout Season 4. Of course, we lost longtime favorites Karen and Molly, killed in the attack, among many others. One presumed dead during the attack, of course, was Margot. But we learned at the very end of the season that she's secretly living in Russia after her treason is discovered. And the Mars team at Happy Valley, which now includes astronauts from the US, Russia, and North Korea, choose to strand themselves in order to save Kelly and her baby. And Danny is exiled from the community to live on his own. So that's where we're at the end of Season 3. I know it's been a minute since we've been in the world of For All Mankind. But of course, we're jumping forward 8 years. And so what they love to do in between is give us these news clips to kind of fill us in on what's happening in the world. I love these. It just helps me get more invested, I think, in the alternate timeline that they're building. And there's some interesting stuff that happens here right into the lead up of Season 4. Ellen is reunited with Pam, but in a surprise twist, she actually is reelected to a second term as president. And during her tenure, the U.S. and Russia become collaborators rather than adversaries, and they make up part of the Mars 7 Alliance dedicated to developing Happy Valley into a mining facility. Meanwhile, over at Helios, they've lost their exclusive rights to harvesting helium on the moon, so they develop a plasma-powered rocket that's capable of traveling to Mars anytime in just 30 days. Very convenient, of course, for the plot of Season 4 to be able to get to Mars a lot faster this year. And towards the end of our timeline catch-up, Al Gore wins the 2000 presidential election, becoming the 42nd U.S. president. It's always interesting when they change up who the president is. I don't know how long it's been since we've had the person who actually was president be in the office in the show, but it's been maybe a decade at least now.
This just to comment on the sizzle reel, those are so fun to see, the alternative news clips. Like if you are aware of any of the actual history of like what they're kind of referencing there, then it's just neat to see, oh, you don't have to make this change to make this universe possible, but it's sort of just playful with actual history and like, maybe this thing changed and this person was president instead of that person, and it ties into the show, or maybe it doesn't. And one thing this show does, I think that wasn't a given at first with For All Mankind, is that it's an alternative space race that didn't happen, but it isn't necessarily for the better. Like, you could look at the premise of the show and think, okay, well, what if the space race continued? It would all just be better. We would all have modern advances sooner, and the show doesn't do that at all. You would, rather than have this climate crisis over the decades in some labor feuds over this or that, it would be brought forward by 20 years, and it would be about this thing that's relevant to the space race continuing. And so that's what's kind of neat about the show, I think, is that it isn't just optimistically, this is what could have happened and everything would have been better and we would have solved all these problems we have. Like, at this point in the show, in season 4, before we even see season 4, there are issues that get brought up that are unresolved today that the show brings on. And I kind of wonder where this whole series goes in the end. Like, is there some grand destination that we reach that, if all of these things were to have happened, would we realize something about humanity sooner, or even eventually versus never at all? And so far in the show, like, this is just to say, what keeps me interested, I think, is that we've not yet reached a massive grand conclusion to this alternative timeline. And instead, we're just seeing sort of, I guess, for one thing, we haven't reached present day yet in the show. We're in the 2000s at this point. But at some point, it seems like we'll have to address not only where we would have been now, but where we would have been in the future, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Like, alternative history is one thing, but they're going to have to get to an alternative future as well. And at some point, we'll talk about this in the future tense, in maybe season 5 or 6 or 7. I don't know how much they'll jump, but that's kind of neat to think about too. Is that this will become an alternative future show at some point as well. But just if you zoom way out and just look at the show as a whole, you're invested in these characters from the very first season throughout, and even if they don't all move forward, you've still got a shrinking core cast of originals, and that's something, if nothing else, you're kind of curious, what happens in their lives.
I think that's the wonderful thing about this show, is I probably have enjoyed this in a completely different way to how yourself, Devon, has enjoyed this, because I know next to nothing about space, right? The history, what's going into the future. I very much have been fixated on the characters. With season 3, there was like a bit of a campy side to the show that had been explored. We seem to be taking a bit of a step back from that element and exploring more the serious side of the future and space and economics as well. Politics in Russia. There's some really, really interesting elements here that we can't delve into too much. I do want to talk about the fact that Ed Baldwin is getting older again. Of course, he continues to serve at Happy Valley rather than come home to his daughter and grandchild. We have Daniel Poole, who's retired, has been living Earthside for 7 years, and Alida, who's working the thrust desk in the Molly Cobb Space Center, struggling to move past the JSC attack, which is where we left season 3. Of course, Will is working in astronaut affairs. Dev moved on from Helios and started his own robotics company, which has a grand element to the story later on in this season. The most interesting to me from a character perspective is Margot living and hiding in Russia, being kept out of the loop on space affairs by the authorities. And we see in the first episode what her daily life has become. Pretty grim, very much detached from anything that she was involved in. Looking into the new characters, let's talk about 2. Specifically, I want to talk about Miles Dale, who is played by Toby Kebbell, who's a former oil rig worker who ships off to Mars looking for work, which just blew my mind, the concept of that, and the complexities that can happen when you are so many hundreds of thousands of miles away from home.
I'll comment on Miles. So I live on the Gulf Coast, and so his story happens on the Gulf Coast as well. He's in Louisiana, I think around Baton Rouge, and so his work is previously on the oil rigs out in the Gulf Coast, and so that's a part of the reality around where I live. And For All Mankind, oil rigs are sort of a thing of the past because of the differences in how we power things in this universe. And so, that's kind of analogous to just, if you look at American history, or, I'm sure it's global as well, but one of the things that happens in American politics is what happens to the coal jobs, and those get replaced, and what do you do in places like West Virginia, and are those former employees retrained, rehired elsewhere, or are they just out of luck? And it's a whole mess. And so in this season sort of tackles that as well. And what if we were no longer reliant on oil rigs and on gas to power cars? And so and then the alternative there is, well, you take that skill set and you go to the moon, or you go to Mars, and you sort of take the experience you had as living, remote on an oil rig for months at a time, and, multiply it by 1,000 or so. And now you're doing the same job, but on a different heavenly body. and also I'll say that Miles represents a kind of a different view, different character's perspective on this show than we've seen so far. So you've seen a lot of the pioneers of a new age. And in this case, Miles represents like more of the janitor character we saw from the first season of Alita's dad, where it's like you don't get a lot of his perspective from that first season. And this season, you've got a whole character dedicated to what if you're not, one of the frontiers of this new space? What if you're, a fall in line employee and you're not given sort of it's like the most realistic it can be. What if you apply like the realities of working a hard job without a lot of prestige, on Earth, but you apply that to in space and the challenges there. And they draw a lot of good parallels, I think, with this character that represents sort of a whole level of society in the real world.
Oh, completely. And another new character, an important character, I think, later on in the season, Ellie Hobson, played by Daniel Stern, the new NASA administrator focused on cutting costs and righting the ship at Happy Valley. I watch these shows about big companies, and because that is what space has become now, right? Before, it was all very much funded by public finances. Now, the likes of Helios and in real life, SpaceX, Amazon, and the like, getting involved in space and space exploration. It's really funny to kind of see how Happy Valley has changed over the seasons. And can they really actually compete and fulfill these grand aspirations that they had?
It's definitely an interesting question, because the setup of this season really is that these various countries have come together to invest in Happy Valley. But that word invest, I mean, it has a double meaning, right? They're putting money into it, but they're expecting a return on their investment through mining these asteroids and getting those resources and profiting off of them. So you've got this balance between, we're still doing cool new space stuff, right? We're still putting our lives on the line and breaking through barriers. But at the same time, there's a budget behind it. And eventually they want to get in the black. They want to be making money off of this endeavor, which is, like you said, is very different from the motivations beforehand. And it'll be interesting to see how, now that NASA has become more like Helios was in the last season, where kind of that driving force for the public good and just doing things because they're new and groundbreaking is going to come from. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Zach, tell us a little bit about the difference between what we're seeing in season 4 and today when it comes to space, what's new, and actually how much of an influence is this show having? Is it working both ways?
I think in the early seasons, you saw some things that were written on paper far ahead of time for the show that then panned out and actually kind of reflected what was happening in reality. For example, I mean, you're in the 70s then, but the interest in continuing the space race. And then in reality, we have this Artemis program where the U.S. is partnering with many countries around the world, and they're investing in this program to go back to the moon, to do things like build the infrastructure on the moon and in space to go beyond and to reach Mars. I mean, the thing that happens in the show is that it's all moved forward, and it all actually happens by several decades. In reality, we're catching up with some of the early seasons, and at this point, the show does some interesting things. I think if you're the opposite of you, for example, where you know every detail about what's happening in space, there's things that you'll pick up in the show like, oh, they're using this program that they say was canceled in this For All Mankind universe, or that was successful but happened 20 years sooner than it actually did, and this is what we learned from that. So they kind of make some clever connections to things that are currently happening or are planned to happen or even happened in the past, and they're using those as kind of like space trivia, I think, to keep diehard space fans, kind of nodding along like, yeah, you're speaking my language. I get it. This would be neat if that happened, and this was the lessons from that. In terms of like lessons from the show or things that are inspired from the show that are happening, I think we've kind of passed the timeline of that by the time we get to season 4. You've got Helios as a representative of all of the private space companies in reality. So, it's SpaceX and Blue Origin and all these different companies. Some of the parts of season 4 get into the other industry players. There's a scene toward the middle of the season where they're naming different companies that exist in reality, and you're like, okay, so that's more grounded in reality there as well. And even the NASA in this season, with the new administrator Eli Hobson, he's former auto industry. I think he's like the former Chrysler CEO, and he retires and goes to NASA. And I think that just plays into the whole, the auto industry isn't what it was. And also seeing people from private industry work in the public sector. You had a NASA administrator before the current one who was in Congress, but he was never involved in space and NASA before that. And so he brought a different approach to the way he dealt with the administration. And so that's kind of representative in Administrator Hobson. There's a little bit of play back and forth, but I think a lot of what you're seeing now by the time we get to season 4 and certainly beyond is you're seeing things that happen in the current news cycle or the last 3 or 4 years reflected in the show as something that happened 20 years earlier. And it's like clever nods to things that you'll see in the news if you follow space now.
The debut episode of For All Mankind's 4th season is now streaming across all of your screens on Apple TV+. I think it's going to be great for those that just enjoy the drama of it, and for those that really are deep into space in more ways than one. Zach will rejoin us at the end of this week's episode to share his TV app Up Next picks for the week. But let's talk about, I think, the biggest news to come out of the entertainment world. And that, of course, is a proposed deal between SAG-AFTRA and the AMPTP, meaning the end of a grueling strike for everyone involved, including the people like you and I that just love movies and TV, and, of course, everyone that brings those stories to life for us to enjoy. An agreement was made on Thursday, which SAG-AFTRA claimed to be a transformative contract that includes gains for every category of SAG-AFTRA member who works this contract. They go on to say that this is a revolutionary agreement achieving major breakthroughs in addressing compensation via residuals and protections for generative artificial intelligence technology, whilst reaffirming the role human performers play in the production of film, television, and streaming entertainment. Now, unfortunately, full details of the agreement are yet to be shared at the time that we're recording, but here's a small breakdown of everything that was agreed. So, more than $1 billion in new wages and benefit plan funding, a streaming participation bonus, minimum compensation increases that break the so-called industry pattern, and for the first time, consent and compensation guardrails on the use of artificial intelligence, along with raised pension and health caps that will channel more value into funds and critical protections for diverse communities. SAG-AFTRA go on to say that they're proud of the phenomenal effort of their negotiating committee. And after 118 days of their strike, they're grateful for everyone's understanding during what's been a very difficult time. Your first thoughts, Devon, on this deal, because things have been a little bit sparse in the production news front for Apple.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that the actors, as we speak now, are back at work. Pending the ratification of the deal, they are able to start promoting their projects and start working on lining up their next projects, which we're excited to hear about. So I'm really happy that the two parties were able to come together and find a deal that works for everyone. Seems like some really big gains for the actors, which is what we were hoping to see, especially around those protections around artificial intelligence. I know that's a big concern for the future of the industry, and it's good to see that there are some guardrails and consent rules there. I know that both sides were pretty anxious to get a deal done. This was kind of the cutoff for them to be able to get production going for some kind of spring-fall schedule. So to be able to get those spring productions back up and running, that's going to be a big win, and I'm thankful they were able to do that. If they hadn't come to a deal this week, we could have been waiting maybe until early next year to get any movement on this front. So I think both sides were really ready to get a deal done, and it does seem like they were able to really find a compromise that works best for everybody. So very grateful to see it. Of course, I think we're both sad that it went on as long as it did and that so many people were kind of caught in the crossfire along the way. I don't think it needed to be this hard, but either way, I'm thankful that the actors are able to go back to work, and the TV and film productions that we are so excited to see will start getting back into production again.
Now, the last few weeks were kind of stuck on a couple of sticking points from both sides, right? So the first was with the AMPTP. They were asking for main stars of productions to be scanned and paid for it, with their likeness to be owned in perpetuity with no access from the deceased's estate. And honestly, I thought this was preposterous. It was named by those affected as the zombie clause.
Wow.
I kind of get where they're coming from. Of course, in relation to that, because SAG-AFTRA kept asking for changes specific to artificial intelligence, very much like what was hanging up the negotiations for the WGA until they found an agreement, SAG-AFTRA, as a kind of a rebuttal to this ridiculous request, asked for a ridiculous request themselves, a percentage from subscriptions per subscriber. Now, I think that was more probably tit for tat than based on anything that they truly thought they could get. And so that's how the negotiations went, and I think that's what stalled them for so long. Now, as happy as I am, Devon, we both are happy. I think everyone listening is happy about this agreement. I agree with you. This strike, especially between SAG-AFTRA and the AMPTP, honestly shouldn't have gone on as long as it did. And I don't really think that either side has the right to wear the halo in this case. I think if something like this was to happen again, we'd need some more kind of adulting when it comes to negotiations. Whilst the story has always been on the entertainment industry and that bubble, and that's how we've been reporting it, these strikes have had impact firsthand with friends that have been laid off in the industry, some who went from being unit drivers on productions to cab drivers to make ends meet. And then in LA specifically, during the downtime, you've got people that work in businesses that have since folded. So, you know, the industry doesn't just revolve around on-set, but you've got publicists, you've got chauffeurs, you've got makeup artists, concierge workers, you've got craft services, some that simply had nothing to do with the dispute, who ultimately, unfortunately, lost their livelihoods during this time. And I think that's something that needs to be taken into account and be thought of carefully before the next time something like this happens. My thoughts are with everyone. Of course, we're super, super happy that this is finally all over. Thankfully, the agreement was confirmed and ratified when sent to members after we finished recording this episode. So get the party poppers out. Woohoo!
Now, with the strike being over, we have lots of productions to look forward to. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye out for any news on casting and productions that are starting up, projects that are being worked on. But in the meantime, we have so many Apple originals to look forward to in the near future. And this week we got a bunch of trailers for those projects, starting with a couple of Christmas specials that we can expect on November 22nd, including hybrid live action and animated family special, The Velveteen Rabbit, and one that I know you and I are both looking forward to, Hannah Waddingham Home for Christmas. Recorded live at the Coliseum in London, one of London's oldest and most beautiful theaters, the 1-hour special will feature Emmy Award winner Hannah Waddingham ringing in the season with musical performances of beloved Christmas classics.
Merry Christmas, everybody! Welcome to my festive extravaganza.
I'm your Christmas miracle!
So this special will debut November 22nd alongside its companion album, available now to pre-save with the single What Christmas Means to Me available to stream today. We'll link that in the show notes if you're ready to get into the holiday spirit early.
I don't want to ruin our review of this show, but yes, more of this, please. More variety of performances every year during the festive season. That's what I want to see. This is, I think, how you do a festive variety show in front of a live audience. Definitely a trick that I feel like Apple missed in the past. This is one of two trailers that we want you to listen to a clip of, we want to talk about, but we also don't want to spoil. So as much as we'll have the trailer linked in the show notes, please don't click it, because I will tell you, there's some genuine surprises that I feel like you're going to miss out on if you know the surprise guests ahead of time, and they're all pretty much ruined in the trailer and the press release that accompanied it this week. That's why we're not mentioning them in this little preview, and why we'd say stay away from the trailer. Instead, quickly dip into the TV app, add Hannah Waddingham Home for Christmas to your up next queue, and quickly dip out again. From Hannah Waddingham to someone a little less full of festive cheer. Of course, I'm talking about Jackson Lamb. This week, we also saw the debut trailer for Season 3 of Slow Horses. A romantic liaison in Istanbul threatens to expose a buried MI5 secret in London. When Jackson Lamb and his team of misfits are dragged into the fight, they find themselves caught in a conspiracy that threatens a future, not just of Slough House, but of MI5 itself.
All right, make this quick. I've got underlings to bully. I'm busy.
No one in Slough House is busy.
Come on, get on with it.
A team from MI5 has gone rogue, and Standish has been taken.
What's the plan? I need a team of good agents, but I just have the slow horses. Ain't the traitors we're looking for. Ex-military.
There will be a reckoning.
You can wipe your slate clean.
Okay. There's another game being played that will probably leave me worse off. I just can't see what this one is yet.
It's an honour to be selected for field work.
Shut up.
Got it.
Really?
Well, far more action-packed than previous seasons, it would seem. What was your first thoughts on the Season 3 trailer for Slow Horses?
Well, of course, it kicks off with one of Jackson Lamb's famous quips where he's deriding his team That seems to be his go-to and how they like to lead off these trailers, which of course just puts you right back into the world of Slow Horses, which I love. I will say that if you're wanting to go into this next season without having too much spoiled, this is another trailer you should probably avoid because it does give away quite a bit of the plot. Now, if you're a fan of the books, then you already know what's going to happen anyway, so go ahead and check it out. But if you haven't read the books and want to be surprised, you might as well hold off because we don't have long to wait. Season 3 of Slow Horses premieres with its first 2 of 6 episodes on Wednesday, November 29th on Apple TV+, and will continue debuting new episodes on Wednesdays throughout December. This one was supposed to be coming on Fridays. They bumped it back a couple of days and I guess have decided to continue to do that throughout the season. It's always curious to see what they put on Wednesdays and what they put on Fridays. Regardless, I'm still so thankful they split it up because it makes it easier for me to keep up with all the Apple originals coming out.
Now, last week, we had the inclusion of the family plan. We talked about this a little bit last week. Of course, this is about Dan Morgan, a devoted husband, a loving father, and a celebrated car salesman who is also a former assassin. And when his past catches up to his present, he's forced to take his unsuspecting family on a road trip unlike any other. We got a trailer just a week after its initial announcement, Devon, and something struck with me that this was quite familiar in a lot of ways. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, we've heard some comparisons between this film and Apple original film Ghosted with its spy themes, but for me, I think this one is a little bit different in that it's leaning into how silly it is. I think Ghosted was trying to be funny, but there was also a heightened nature to it. It was trying to be a little bit prestige, and some people have different feelings on how effectively they achieved that. This film is not going for anything like that. This is just your silly family Christmas popcorn movie. You just sit down and you watch Mark Wahlberg fight off an assassin with his baby's bottle and yell, "Hey, let me put my kid down first," as he's fighting a guy in the grocery store. This is just silly fun, and it looks like it's going to be a really good time. I think the casting looks great based on the trailer. Michelle Monaghan's reaction when she finds out that they're going to Vegas, and she's just so on board, because she's just so ready for some kind of adventure in her life, and she has no idea what she's signing herself up for. I love the premise of this. I think it's going to be a fun one, and I'm looking forward to it.
Devon, I'm looking forward to seeing this one too. I feel like, though, they may have missed a trick here. Not only could Mark Wahlberg have been a secret assassin with a secret past, but his past could have also been as a rapper, namely Marky Mark, which of course was his true life persona back in the day. The Family Plan premieres on Apple TV Plus on December 15th, bang in the middle of the festive season. Now, a show coming a little bit later on, at the end of January, is Masters of the Air. This is based on Donald L. Miller's book of the same name, a limited series following men of the 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, as they conduct perilous bombing raids over Nazi Germany and grapple with the frigid conditions, lack of oxygen, and sheer terror of combat conducted at 25,000 feet in the air, all for the sake of destroying the horror of Hitler's Third Reich. Some were shot down and captured, some were wounded or killed, and some were lucky enough to make it home. Regardless of individual fate, a toll was exacted on them all.
When you look at it, you don't pay attention to what's really going on. It's kind of beautiful.
We came from every corner of the country with a common purpose.
Go, 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 go!
To bring the war to Hitler's doorstep.
These daylight missions. It's suicide.
Wow. I gotta say, Devon, the opening moments of this trailer I thought were both horrifying and beautiful at the same time. Because this is a time where no matter where you are in the world, you pay your respects to the people that gave the ultimate sacrifice to give us the life that we're living now. And of course, these stories have to be told. And these stories, once again, are brought to us by some familiar faces.
That's right. This one's executive produced by Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, and Gary Goetzman, three people you might have heard of before. It's written and co-executive produced by John Orloff, who rejoins the team after working with them on both The Pacific and Band of Brothers for HBO. And it stars just an incredible group of performers here, Sigmund. Austin Butler, Callum Turner, Anthony Boyle, Nate Mann, Rafferty Law, Barry Keoghan, Josiah Cross, Brandon Cook, and Newt Gatwa. I mean, what a team, both behind and in front of the camera, to be putting together this epic series. I think that it looks like it really is going to be quite something to see.
I'm not too sure if it's because of when this trailer was released, but there was something that really struck me about this. Not just the cinematography and the sounds of distant explosions, but the score as well. Everything about this trailer honestly had my heart in my mouth throughout. And from a technical point of view as well, I cannot wait to rock my surround system each and every week and just be taken on a ride through, as I say, terror and sacrifice, but hopefully deeper meaning in this show. And I think this is something that Steven Spielberg even brought to Apple TV Plus early on with amazing stories that need to be told. Lots of eerie goings on in the world. And this is a show that is coming to screens, I think, at the right time.
And I think the timing of this trailer is also right as well, with this weekend being Veterans Day here in the US, Remembrance Day in the UK, a time for all of us to remember these events and recognize the people who were involved in them. Masters of the Air will premiere globally on Friday, January 26th, with its first 2 of 9 episodes across all of your screens on Apple TV+. Now, Sigmund, one question I had when we were talking about Masters of the Air a couple of weeks ago was whether or not Band of Brothers and The Pacific would be coming to Apple TV Plus as part of a library offering. And believe it or not, HBO have actually licensed out Band of Brothers to Netflix.
Of course.
I'm not sure exactly what happened there. An interesting development for sure. Now, speaking of in development, this week we got news of a new Peanuts feature film that's being created for Apple TV Plus by Wild Brain Studios. Expected to enter production in 2024, the new family film will see the Peanuts gang go on an epic adventure to the big city, learning the true meaning of friendship while meeting some surprising new friends along the way. I'm excited about this segment. Of course, we've seen some great Peanuts specials come from Wild Brain to Apple TV Plus, but we haven't seen a full-length feature film on the level of something like the Peanuts movie, which came out a few years ago in theaters. So this will be exciting. It'll be interesting to see what animation style they go with, if they stick with what they've been doing for the specials, or if maybe they go for that more 3D look that we've seen from them. Either way, this sounds like a cool project, and I'm excited to see it come out.
Yeah, very, very cool. If it is in the 3D form, maybe we'll see a cinematic release down the line. We haven't seen that so far in the partnership between Apple, Peanuts, and Wild Brain. Maybe this is the jumping off point for that to become a reality. And talking of theatrical releases, tickets for Napoleon went on sale this week, including big screen formats such as Screen X, IMAX Laser, and IMAX 70mm. Unfortunately, though, it would seem 70mm presentations will be limited to the film's North American theatrical run. I am slightly disappointed about this, but nevertheless, very much looking forward to seeing Napoleon on the biggest screen in the UK, much like Killers of the Flower Moon, and that experience which I still am reminiscing on every day, weeks later. Cannot wait to finally get to talk about that. And of course, we have the 4-hour director's cut coming to streaming at some point as well. But moving away from the theatrical experience and into a more interactive experience coming next month for an upcoming Apple Originals series that we can expect next week. Tell us what's happening with the Monsterverse at CCXP.
Yeah, Monarch Legacy of Monsters will debut an immersive fan experience at CCXP, the largest comic and entertainment convention in the world in Sao Paulo, Brazil. That'll be taking place this December. And then on December 3rd, as part of the event, showrunner Chris Black and executive producers Tori Tunnell and Joey Harold will join fans for a panel discussion and Q&A at CCXP's Thunder Stage. So if you're a fan of the Monsterverse and you're going to CCXP, be sure to check out both that experience and that Q&A to get excited for a series that I know you and I are both very much looking forward to and we'll be discussing in depth next week.
Staying on the theme of Comic Cons and collectibles is something that really we've seen very little of, beside, of course, Ted Lasso. We talked about the Barbies the other week. There seems to be real untapped potential when it comes to Apple Originals sci-fi series and films. We heard last year that there were some licensing agreements for Severance. I hope they will come when it comes to season 2, because, you know, I want one of those keyboards that the innies get to use. That would be fantastic as a themed Apple TV remote, maybe. Maybe. That hasn't come yet, but we have had news this week of Heathside Trading, who have signed an agreement with Skydance to launch a consumer products line based on the global hit television series Foundation. Darren Epstein from Heathside commented on the news, saying that he was so thrilled to be working with Skydance and IMG on the series of prop replicas, ships, and die-cast under our Master Replicas and Kahedo brands. What have you got your eye on from the series?
Well, I would love some recreations of the ships, maybe the Deliverance or Salvor ship, or some of those Imperial hyper traveling ships. Those would be cool as well. But I think the thing I'd really want on my desk, and it could even be a cool fidget toy, would be the Prime Radiant, especially if it could transform and flatten out and stuff like that. That would be amazing. Now, of course, I don't think the recreations will be able to tell the future if you flip them the right way, but they could throw that in as a bonus, I guess. That'd be cool as well. Now, you're right. I will be keeping my collectibles safe and sound up on a high and secure shelf away from little hands that might be wanting to use them as toys. This week, we also got news about a new way you'll be able to keep your home safe using technology coming from Apple and being shared with other manufacturers. The Connectivity Standards Alliance this week, that's the group behind the Matter Home Standard, has announced a new standard for smart locks called Aliro that's based on Apple's HomeKey technology. More than 675 companies have committed to supporting the technology, which will standardize smart locks the way Matter has standardized smart home accessories. And you'll be able to use all the different ways that you can use Apple's HomeKey right now, whether that's NFC, whether that's Bluetooth LE, or whether that's, of course, the U1 chip. All these technologies will be coming to third-party smart locks the same way that Apple's HomeKit security standard was the basis for Matter. Now, there's been no release date announced for Aliro, so we don't know when exactly it'll be coming. But I think it's great to see the smart home continue to be standardized, especially around Apple's super secure technologies that they're willing to share with others. I think that that's a great basis for it, hopefully setting the foundation for a much more accessible and affordable smart home in the future.
This news follows expansions in categories to certain items. The one that I have been waiting for a long, long time are robot vacuums, which aren't yet supported in Apple Home. So now that they're going to be part of the Matter standard, maybe we'll see a iOS update to include that come January time. And that is the item Beyond the locks, that's on my bucket list. Of course, all of these developments go through a protracted beta development cycle. And that's not just in smart home, that's in streaming apps as well, as we found out this week.
Yes, a company that you wouldn't normally expect to be releasing public betas, Disney, has announced that they'll be putting out a beta version of the Disney Plus app in December that will include content from Hulu for people who subscribe to the Disney bundle. And so we heard at their last earnings call that they were planning to do this. Now they're shoring up those plans as the end of the year looms. It's not going to be a full public release, but I think for those who want to opt into it in December, they'll be able to try it out. And I have to say, Sigmund, I'm going to opt in. I'm going to try it. I was dubious about this decision when it first came out. We were all kind of reeling from the whole Max thing and the way that played out. So I was a little worried, but thinking about it a little bit more, and after redoing my Apple TV home screen in light of tvOS 17, I'm actually excited to have Hulu and Disney Plus consolidated. The Disney Plus app is really great. I love the player, and I'm hopeful to see this as the first step into Hulu's bright new future under the full ownership of Disney, which we talked about last week.
Do we also have any details on what's going to happen with the live TV portion of Hulu when that mergence happens?
So the plan right now is to leave the Hulu app alone, available independently if you still want to use it. And actually, I think if you're just a Hulu subscriber, you won't be able to access that content in the Disney Plus app. You have to have both subscriptions to use that combination app. So if you're just a Hulu subscriber, you'll stick with the current Hulu app, which will also include the live TV version. Now, my question is, if eventually the content in Hulu moves over to the Disney Plus subscription, does Hulu eventually just become a live TV service? I don't know. I know that that's actually a pretty, large size business in that world, and that's a moneymaker because it's the cable bundle, right? So I don't see that going away. I think they're going to stick with it. Honestly, I think that's the future of Hulu, is that live streaming option, and the content can kind of move over into the Disney Plus app. That's what I foresee anyway. But for now, if you're a Hulu fan and you enjoy either the streaming service or the TV service, you can continue to do so in the Hulu app. That's not going to be interfered with at all by this change.
Very cool. Very cool. As someone that was a Max subscriber until they announced that eventually they would be removing 4K and Dolby Atmos from legacy ad-free accounts, the time has come, because Max has now fulfilled that promise to remove both those items, along with some of the offline downloading limits from legacy ad-free accounts. They will have to prop up, I think it's $20 now a month, which is pretty heavy, and I think it's probably mostly in comparison to Netflix in terms of pricing these days. I will no doubt jump back on it at some point, because there's lots that I feel like I'm missing out on. Scary and noteworthy news this week. Of course, something else, maybe just as scary, is the news that Resident Evil 3 Remake will make its debut on Apple Silicon December 20th. I checked out Resident Evil Village on my iPhone 15 Pro. You do need the Pro variants of the iPhone 15 to be able to run some of these more graphically intensive games. This is just the latest. Really looking forward to it. And there have been so many different renditions of Resident Evil 3, including a 3D version of this game. Now, when it comes to gaming and 3D, of course, the first thing we think about is Apple Vision Pro. And I'll tell you, I have been in one of these experiences for all of 4 seconds, I think, on a PSVR back in the day. If I can find the clip, I'll upload it. A friend took a video of me and I absolutely freaked out. Literally seconds into a Resident Evil game and threw the headset off. So that's not for me. But something I am looking forward to with the Apple Vision Pro launch is the introduction of 3D presentations of films. And we got some exciting news this week. First uncovered by one of our friends, Rasmus, at Flat Panels HD, before any sign of these listings was promptly removed by Apple later in the week. But what did we learn this week about this?
This week, a new icon appeared on a handful of movie listings in the TV app on tvOS 17.2 beta. And that icon, of course, was 3D. It's a silhouette of the Apple Vision Pro with the label 3D cut out of the middle, indicating that certain films, including Jurassic World Dominion, Pacific Rim Uprising, and Shrek, will be available for purchase in a 3D format when Apple Vision Pro arrives. Now, as you said, this label has since been removed, so maybe this was something that slipped through or that was being tested and caught very quickly. I think we knew that some kind of 3D video format was going to be coming to Apple Vision Pro based on the Avatar Way of Water demo that was shown at WWDC, but it's definitely cool to see it rolling out, even for just a moment, and to know that at least some of these films are being prepared in that format for the launch of Apple Vision Pro. Now, the question, of course, is what will that upgrade process look like for films that you already own? Back when movies were upgraded from HD to 4K, those were free upgrades. If you had already purchased the HD version, you got the 4K for free. We don't know if that'll be the case for 3D or not, or if that'll be a separate purchase or some kind of upgrade on top of your existing purchase. It's yet to be seen exactly what that will look like. All we've seen so far is the icon, but it's exciting to think about and cool to see that it's coming as Apple Vision Pro is preparing for launch.
I think it's really, really interesting because it seems at least that the icon only shows on items that you hadn't previously purchased, which could mean that some of these presentations are going to be baked into the TV app via service. However, I've got a funny feeling, especially with news and figures on the Apple TV based on purchases starting to outweigh streaming subscriptions within the TV app when it comes to the charts. I can see it just being another benefit of really being baked into the Apple ecosystem, because what other digital storefront is offering immersive 3D presentations either on 3D TVs or otherwise? What is very clear here, though, is that the icon is indicating Apple Vision Pro, and anyone that's been holding on to their 3D TVs or projectors may have a while yet to wait to see that maybe come to the traditional screens. Now, whilst we're talking about the latest betas currently running for developers and those on the public beta program, tvOS 17.2 Beta 2 had one addition that I noticed, and that is now when you're using the sidebar navigation, you had the icon for the current logged in user, and in Beta 1 you couldn't interact with that icon. Now you can, and you can switch users direct from that new sidebar navigation, which does make me wonder if we're going to see more and more changes to the overall system, even though the new control center only launched in September. We'll have to see. There was also a very slight change in control center and the user profile switching. Now the grid is longer rather than wider. So just a very subtle change there. Of course, one change that hasn't come, which we've heard will be coming as soon as next month, is the retirement of iTunes Movies and iTunes TV show apps. They are still available as of Beta 2. And I do wonder, given all of the features that are exclusive to those apps, if they will retire as soon as was initially reported. I think they're going to be here for a little while to come. At least my fingers and toes are crossed, and I hope so, Devin.
Of course, we'll be keeping an eye as the tvOS 17.2 beta cycle continues. This week also saw the release of iOS 17.2 Beta 2, which adds the Info and Up Next tabs to the TV app's video player. I think you and I both, Sigmund, misremembered that this had already come, back when it came to the tvOS video player. I think in our minds it just made sense for Apple to bring it to both at the same time. Now, the thing I'm really excited for that came in the latest iOS beta, though, is spatial video recording, which is now available on the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. We've been wondering how this is going to work, what it's going to look like, what the UI is going to be, and how playback will work. Well, now we've learned you can go into your camera settings and enable spatial video recording, and then it'll be a toggle in the camera app when you're in video mode. Now, when you enable this setting, the camera will be set to 1080p, 30 frames per second, non-HDR recording, and it will give you a warning if you're too close to the subject that you're recording. It really wants some padding around the object that's being captured. But you record your video, you can play it back on your iPhone as you always would. And of course, when Apple Vision Pro releases, then you'll be able to play it back in 3D. Another question a lot of people had was how much space these files were going to take up, because alongside the announcement that this was coming, Apple also announced larger iCloud storage tiers, seemingly to store all those spatial videos that people will be recording. It turns out that it's about 130 megabytes per minute, which seems pretty reasonable for what you're getting there, all that 3D capture. You're basically filming with two different cameras at the same time and getting that depth information as well. And that may have something to do with the resolution being limited to 1080p and not capturing the HDR color as well. We'll see how the format continues to develop, but at least to start off with capturing your videos in this spatial format, I think this is a great start.
I can only imagine that we're going to start from this weekend capturing everything in spatial video. What I'm really, really happy about is that, and it makes sense, that this format will be viewable on all screens. It was something we worried about. It's something we no longer have to worry about. Of course, I think that 1080p 30 frames per second limit isn't as big an issue in real life as you may think when hearing those specs, because of course, everything is 4K and 8K these days. That's not to say that resolutions and HDR doesn't come later on. Maybe not on this iPhone, but in future iterations. That's normally the way Apple introduce new feature sets, making sure that they're stable first, and then over the long haul, making sure that those memories are intact. And I think that's probably the crucial element at this moment in time. So really, really cool to see. It's also really, really cool to see that you will indeed be able to record spatial video with a high-speed SSD attached via USB Type-C on the new iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. So I think we're all set now. We're just waiting for the Apple Vision Pro hardware to come. And I was thinking last week, we ended on a bit of a damp note with our predictions. A tie, 1-1, and I'm going to quote you here, Devon, in saying that Americans especially don't like ties. So we have to even this out with a tiebreaker point, which of course we won't know until it happens. And that of course has to be us guessing the closest date for an Apple Vision Pro launch. And the reason I bring it up is we're seeing more and more references to Apple Vision Pro, not just within the Vision OS betas, but also, as we saw this week, tvOS as well. So, seeing as I was the first to predict with the time on the last predictions, I think it's time for you to step up and give your prediction on when you think Apple Vision Pro is going to launch.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? They've been saying early 2024 for Apple. Early doesn't always mean the same thing that we think early means, but there's definitely some signs that the software is coming along, right? We're seeing it pop up in different places, so it's tough to predict. I was originally thinking maybe the end of April, but the more I think about it, the more we learn, the more I see. I'm going to say by the end of February. So let's say February 23rd, we'll have the Apple Vision Pro. If they're planning on doing iPads, March, April time, they probably don't want to share that same time with the Apple Vision Pro. So all the rumors and news, they've moved me up a couple months. I'm going to say February 23rd.
Okay, we got a specific date, February 23rd. I'm getting the calendar out now because this is getting serious. Because I was almost certain you were going to say March or April, and then something changed. I'm not too sure what changed, but something definitely changed between private conversations and recording. So I love it. I love the competitive spirit that's come. So you said February 23rd, right? Yeah. I am going for... I'm going for March 1st.
Oh, no.
The week after.
No.
And this is all about being the nearest to release date. I'm
not the only one who changed since we talked privately, Sigmund.
Because, and the reason why I say this is because I think you're right. I think it's going to fall, whatever this release is going to fall on a Friday. That is a traditional release for most Apple products. This is a massive release. This isn't a MacBook refresh. This is a new platform entirely. When we originally talked about this, I did think February. And the reason why I thought February was because one issue I think that has come up in the lead up to this is having developers actually really be able to envision what they're working with. So the quicker that units can get out to developers beyond the handful of people that get picked to have actual hardware, the better, I think, for the platform. The only reason I'm going with March 1st is because it's the nearest to February 23rd. But I think any later than that, and you may be interfering with other product launches, it's all set. February 23rd for Devon and March the 1st for me. So I'm hoping March 1st or later, although personally, the sooner it can come, the better.
If we had it our way, it would come out January 1st because that technically counts as early 2024. But regardless, we'll be counting down the days. And I guess once they make the announcement, we'll have to go back and score our predictions and see who ended up being the closest. Now, moving from the technology of the future to hardware we have in our homes today, I know you've been doing some experiments with your Apple TV when it comes to VPNs. tvOS 17 brought support for third-party VPNs to the Apple TV. I know that's unlocked a lot of capabilities, especially for those like you, Sigmund, who use services and accounts in multiple regions. So before we jump into what exactly Tailscale is and how you're using it, how have you been previously managing to watch and stream in multiple regions?
I mean, it was an absolute mess, wasn't it? We talked about this a while back. I was using 2 Apple TVs for every TV in the house, and then mixing that with automations. So I'd have everything wired via Ethernet. But before going to one of the mesh routers in the house, they would be in an Ethernet splitter. And that splitter would be controlled through an automation through switch bots, which are these cool little robots that will do what their name entails, right? They will flick a switch for you. So I had to find the perfect Ethernet switch to be able to do this. But it had its drawbacks, one of them being a delay in the Apple TV reading from one network to the other, so you had to wait a few seconds before diving into the app or the content that you wanted to play. So when it comes to location changing, that kind of thing, the introduction of VPN with tvOS 17 allow you to do exactly what you said, and you're able to jump regions, which I'm sure would be really helpful for yourself as well with Planet Earth free on the BBC right now. But there are some other things that you can do with VPNs, which I wasn't aware of, not to this extent either. Whilst I was looking at different VPN providers, because the one that I was subscribed to didn't get their app ready in time for the launch of tvOS 17. I hear that they're working on it, but still nothing has come to fruition as of yet. And so I was looking amongst all of the different providers, and the one that stood out to me was Tailscale. And it's because it does things that others simply don't. And it really does take advantage of VPN technology. So the coolest feature of Tailscale is the ability to add Apple TV as an exit node to your Tailnet. Does that all make sense? Of course not. But in simple terms, what that means is you can use your Apple TV as a device that you connect to remotely to funnel internet traffic from iOS, Mac, or Apple TVs so that they appear as though they are grabbing that information from the same network. Now, this is great for online protection, of course, on any public network that you may be connected to, which is one of the biggest use cases for VPNs in general. But it's also brilliant in the circumstance of maybe connecting to online banking from a foreign country where normally your bank flags up that your login is appearing suspicious because it's logging in from an unusual location. Doing the same thing by connecting to your Apple TV via Tailnet eradicates that situation from ever happening. Another benefit of using Apple TV as an exit node for your personal self-hosted VPN, and I think that's also another important aspect of Tailscale, is that the new Apple TV is incredibly low powered. Typically, you're looking at $1 per watt per year if it's on 24/7. And that's comparatively low compared to, say, running an exit node via a Raspberry Pi, which can run at anything between 5 and 15 watts, or even a personal computer like a Mac that's on all year long. So there are benefits from that aspect as well. And then, of course, with a Raspberry Pi or a Mac, you've got to manage the OS that's running just to make sure everything is going as it should. Now, the Apple TV, you can set the Apple TV to update its apps automatically as the updates come about. So there isn't so much hands-on there. The biggest thing on here is you can continue running an exit node on Apple TV in the background whilst also streaming, gaming, having a FaceTime call, share playing, whatever you do normally on your Apple TV, this doesn't interfere. Right now, the only caveat is that subnet routing isn't yet supported on Apple TV, although I hear it's coming very soon. And you must make sure that your Apple TV doesn't go into standby mode, which has proved, honestly, a bit of an issue that I've yet to overcome, but no doubt could be resolved through a simple automation. So very, very easy to sort through. Now, for non-business use cases, and I think this is a headline grabber, Tailscale is actually free, which is great when running a personal Tailscale VPN. And if you want to switch locations like your typical VPN service does to access region-restricted content, you can do so with a $5 monthly add-on thanks to their partnership with Molvad. Now, of course, for people in the States like yourself, Devon, the region switching isn't such a big thing because most of the content that you want to consume is already available in the States. However, when it comes to sports, there are blackouts depending on what region you're in. And so you could have an Apple TV away from your hometown. Then you could connect through one configuration to not only be able to change the location for maybe watching something in the UK, but also connecting to that exit node at your family members to pretend to be at their location and therefore be able to watch that otherwise blacked out baseball game or American football game. That's something we don't actually deal with in the UK, but I know it's something that is still prevalent in the States. But along the same lines, the universal use case for Tailscale and setting up exit nodes with friends is a free solution to overcoming the password sharing crackdowns from streaming services regularly sniffing your IP to make sure you're all in the same household. That's especially handy, I think, for families split across locations and makes things far less complicated for mums and dads and, of course, children of divorce who can, with one click, look as though they are watching their favourite shows at home. And so this is not an ad placement, even though it's sounding like it, because I am so chuffed with what is being able to be achieved here with Tailscale. Instead, this is a use case for VPN that I had only just dug into, because I'd honestly never thought about a self-hosted private VPN before, and probably, again, wouldn't have had the big VPN provider I'd been using for years been ready with their tvOS 17 app at launch. There's a lot of jargon surrounding Tailscale, and so you might be a little bit miffed at first, but do a search for a simple breakdown of how to get set up. It is pretty easy once you get over the jargon, because I would say the service doesn't come with the most user-friendly guide, but really, really clever stuff indeed.
Yeah, this sounds really incredible. I was not familiar with Tailscale before you started diving into it, but the fact that it works so well with the Apple TV already, that they're one of the first, VPN services on the platform, just shows how on top of things they are, how invested they are in letting people use the devices that they want to use as their endpoints or, entry points into their networks as well. There are so many different use cases for this. We've touched on a couple of them, but I imagine our listeners probably have some other ideas as well for how to use this. So we'd love to hear, if you're using Tailscale or a similar service, what you're using it for and how it's benefiting your Apple TV watching experience as well. So be sure to let us know. We'll leave a link in the show notes to Tailscale if you'd like to check it out. And if you do end up using it, be sure to tell us. So that's our big Apple TV extension discussion for the week, Sigmund, but let's get into some Apple original content that's coming this weekend. Lots to look forward to, including MLS Season Pass, of course, ramping up to the playoffs. Lots of games going on, including some final games for teams that aren't going on to the playoff tournament. So if your favorite team didn't make it this year, hey, better luck next year, but be sure to catch their final game on MLS Season Pass before their season wraps up. As far as Apple Originals go, this week on Friday, we have the premiere of For All Mankind Season 4 and a new episode of Lessons in Chemistry. I just continue to love that series so much, Sigmund. I don't know how many people have gotten into it, but it just pulls at my heartstrings more and more each week. I'm loving it and really enjoying the weekly run of Lessons in Chemistry. There's a new Apple TV Plus original podcast coming on Monday, The Pirate of Prague. This one's hosted by Joe Nocera, who you might remember from the Shrink Next Door podcast, which wasn't an Apple original podcast, but of course the series was an Apple original series. I know a lot of people watched the show and then went back and listened to the podcast on Wondery. Well, now he's coming over to an Apple original podcast called The Pirate of Prague. Across 8 episodes, this podcast tells the story of the charming young Czech Viktor Kazini, who smooth-talked his super wealthy Aspen neighbors and a Wall Street titan into investing huge sums of cash to snap up Azerbaijan's state-owned oil company, promising staggering returns. If it sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. Very intriguing premise for a podcast. Knowing Joe Nocera's past work, I know that his narration and his research style is going to make it even more intriguing as we go. You can listen to the trailer linked in the show notes. This is definitely one that I'll be checking out. And then, of course, on Wednesday, we have a new episode of The Buccaneers. If I didn't say enough nice things about it last week, Sigmund, I'll say it again. Check out The Buccaneers. It is awesome. There's a really cool extra from the series this week. It's not a music video so much. It's a scene from the first episode of the series, but it features the song Nothing New, Taylor's version by Taylor Swift and Phoebe Bridgers. Perfect soundtrack for this series, I have to say, and that is a great combination. So if you want a little taste of not only what the series is about, but also the vibes that they're giving with the soundtrack as well, check out that video. It's a nice little entry point into the series.
Now, the other week, we got this study with long-form video with Storm Reed. I don't know if you remember it. This week, though, we got something quite similar in terms of long form, and I love it. It is an hour of rain sounds from the Love Institute. Of course, an extra from Christos Nikou's Fingernails, the Apple original film that released this past week. If you haven't checked it out, please do. It's absolutely fantastic. And we also got a first look, really, at Monarch Legacy of Monsters with the opening title sequence, which is very Godzilla-rific. Terrific. Godzilla-rific. We'll work it. Again, cannot wait to talk more about that show next week. But we end this week's extras kind of where we started. More Taylor Swift.
We can't escape Taylor Swift news, Sigmund. It's just coming for us constantly. This week it was announced that Taylor Swift is Apple Music's Artist of the Year 2023. Because of course she is. I mean, look at the year that she's had with the Eras Tour, with her albums coming out, with her film, of course, that Apple highlights in the press release, giving us even more reason to believe that the Eras Tour film could be coming to Apple TV Plus next year. We've got our fingers crossed. We'd love to see it. But congratulations to her for the award, and we'll put a link in the show notes to the Apple Music Spotlight page featuring all kinds of playlists and her albums and a set list from the Eras Tour, so you can check out all of her work and celebrate her award this year as Apple Music's Artist of the Year.
Taylor Swift, now her own media empire, almost as big as UBA. Of course, the media empire that surrounds the morning show and its third season, as it explored the cutthroat world of morning news and the lives of the people who helped America wake up in the morning. Of course, in season 3, the future of the network is thrown into question and loyalties are pushed to the brink when a tech titan takes an interest in the media network. Unexpected alliances form, private truths are weaponized, and everyone is forced to confront their core values both in and out of the newsroom. And we had some confronting to do as well. But before we recap the season, here's a little clip.
We are flirting with financial disaster.
So you're selling UBA to Paul Marks?
Paul Marks?
How do you do? Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. That's who you see for the future of UBA.
You know, we were supposed to change things, weren't we?
Do you know how much is at stake here?
Whatever personal thing you two have between the two of you.
I'm sorry. Personal.
Good to see you again, Alex.
Nice to see you.
Thought we should get to know each other before this deal goes through.
Are you sure you really know who he is? How well do you know this guy?
So, Devon, the morning show was, as I think you'll agree, the highlight, alongside For All Mankind, when Apple TV Plus launched in November of 2019. This third season, I think, is the best season that we've seen so far from the morning show. But what happened?
Well, I agree with you, Sigmund. This third season was the strongest so far, one that I very much enjoyed. So let's get into it. Of course, spoilers incoming for those who haven't seen it just yet. A lot happened in season 3. Recoiling from a cyber attack and suffering from board infighting, UBA is on the brink of financial ruin. Corey tries to save the company by secretly selling the company to Paul Marks, played by none other than John Hamm himself, a billionaire whose day job is building rockets. Sound like anybody in our world, Sigmund? Alex unsuccessfully vies for more control within UBA, and along the way becomes romantically entangled with Paul Marks. You can't choose who you love. Bradley uses her on-the-ground coverage of the January 6th insurrection to land the evening news anchor job, but along the way she deletes footage of her brother Hal storming the Capitol. When she investigates Paul's misdeeds at Hyperion, his rocket company, he threatens to reveal her secret and ruin her life. The UBA leak brings to light systemic issues within the company, including racial disparities in compensation that new morning show host Christina tries to publicly reckon with. Yanko, as usual, has some bizarre thoughts to add to the conversation. And as Paul's deal to buy UBA nears closing, Alex unearths his plan to dismantle the company and sell it for parts. She and Bradley work with Laura Peterson to arrange a better offer from rival network NBN to merge the two companies. The board accepts the deal, and UBA lives to fight another day. Finally, at the very end of the season, with the FBI circling them, Bradley and her brother Hal decide to come clean about his involvement with the insurrection and her part in the cover-up. Alex accompanies Bradley to the FBI office and assures her that everything will be okay. Quite a lot happening in this season. Even that summary doesn't cover all of it, and I have to tell you, it was quite a ride over these 10 episodes.
One thing that I think the morning show has done consistently well through its 3 seasons, it still is able to show some incredible nuance when tackling its subject matter. You know, we saw that with the cancelling of Mitch in season 1, and now we see that in season 2. I've got to say, I thought it was very brave for Apple and for the makers of the morning show to touch upon January 6th and turn it into a storyline in which, to a degree, even with the faces that Alex pulls at Bradley Jackson's brother right at the end, there is compassion there, even for those that maybe some people are politically inclined to believe shouldn't be there. And I think that's very brave. I think there is a human element to this show that continues. And I also love the fact that they're not afraid to, like past seasons, touch upon a lot of current events. But before we get into the current events, what were your thoughts as an American, January 6th being brought into the series?
Well, at first, I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to tie it in. I think one thing the morning show does in my mind is it has like a list of things that they have to include in the season. And sometimes they go really deep on them, and sometimes they kind of bring them in as more like buzzwords or just kind of things happening in the culture that, they're a part of the conversation, but they're not necessarily the focus of the conversation. And I thought that's what they were going to do at first. And then they sort of latched onto it as a plot point, not only putting Bradley there, using that as a way to propel her career, but also putting her brother there and seeing how that affects their dynamic and the decisions that she makes. So I agree with you. It does kind of put a little bit of a face to some of those people that maybe you see on the news. I don't think that they went so far as to make you sympathetic towards the actions that were taken. You know, there's a pretty clear line in the sand that what was done was obviously unacceptable, and they even bring in another person who was involved and kind of talk about how it ruined his life and how he lost his family. But at the same time, this is someone who's important to Bradley, and obviously that's going to impact the plot. It was definitely an interesting decision. I do appreciate the way that the morning show isn't afraid to tackle current events and make them a part of the series. And I thought that the way they handled it, and it seems like it's going to have big implications for the series going on, as it does have implications for the world and politics, and especially, people in the United States as we're getting ready for another election next year.
Yay.
But there are a lot of other things covered in the season as well. Of course, we've got the COVID-19 pandemic carrying over from season 2. They have a whole episode where they go back and catch up on where everybody was during lockdowns. A little bit of a flashback in the middle of the season. You've got the Dobson decision. You've got Russia's invasion of Ukraine, cybersecurity, income inequality, billionaires' involvement with the media, and crisis at media companies in the switch to streaming. They talked about UBA Plus quite a bit this season, maybe not as much as season 2, but it's interesting to see how that conversation has continued to develop. I wanted to ask you, Sigmund, how do you feel they tackled all of these different current events and the way they kind of tied them into the plot of the season?
I thought the switch to streaming was very on the nose, and I was so happy to see that. What I would say is there is so much that a show like this is trying to encapsulate. Each season is very much a story of its time, and sometimes some of those elements get lost in the shuffle and maybe don't go as deep as we would hope. I don't feel like that was the case this season. I thought they did a really fantastic job. And there were even moments where I almost felt like the show was able to poke fun a little bit at the media bubble. The first moments that this hack happens, the first thoughts from everyone in the newsroom at UBA is that it was some kind of cyber terrorist attack related to the events of January 6th. And so I loved those elements as well, which I thought were very subtle. I also think Yanko is a very, very important character in this show. And I do like the fact that he is able to be outspoken. But at the same time, come the end of the season, you can see that he's respected for that. Now that he is finally within the role that he wants to be, starting initially as a weatherman and now the co-host of the morning show. So very, very cool. I just really enjoyed all of the performances in the series. My most favourite of the performances, and one that I think is probably going to be overlooked because of course we have the likes of Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon and Billy Crudup, and of course the introduction of Jon Hamm alongside Karen Pittman. But for me, the highlight of this series was Stella Black, played by Greta Lee. I just thought she was absolutely fantastic. This is what I feel to be her breakout year across both Apple Original Series and now film as well, with A24's Past Lives, a highlight for me. And yeah, just an incredible talent that I've really enjoyed seeing blossom really this season beyond her season 2 debut. So really, really cool, and a strong character. I loved her.
Yeah, Stella is a great character. I really enjoyed her role in this season. I hope to see her take on an even bigger role in the future of the series. Of course, we know that there is a 4th season coming. The show was picked up for 2 seasons when it was renewed for season 3. We don't know when it's coming. We don't have any details on that. But I thought it might be good to end this conversation with just some of our hopes of what we'd like to see going forward for the series. Aside from more Stella, I think we're both on the same page there. A couple other things I'd really like to see. I hope that if the show is ending with season 4 or whenever it does eventually wrap up, that it will do so on a positive note. The characters within the series talk a lot about the importance of the media and journalism and how it matters that UVA continues to exist. And I completely agree with that. I think that we do need those sources of information out in the world. But a lot of times I think some of that benefit and the good that they do gets lost in some of the interpersonal conflict. It's a lot of people doing bad things to each other and then going on TV and smiling, which is entertaining, but I would love to see a little more focus on how the media can affect the world for good. Some kind of resolution there. Now, they might get panned for, navel gazing or something like that, but I do believe that it's important to see something like that in the future. And then the other thing I would love to see is just some kind of happy ending for Bradley. I think she's my favorite character in the series as far as someone to root for and someone who I think that I sympathize with a lot. And we don't know what her future looks like, if it's jail time or anything like that. But I would love to see her just get some kind of happy ending. I think she's the one that we've been on the journey with the most, from a small town reporter all the way up to evening news anchor. And now her potential downfall with this whole snafu with the FBI. But I think seeing her journey wrap up on a good note as well is something I'd like to see. Is there anything in particular you're looking forward to with the 4th season?
I very much agree with you on the first point. What I would like to see, and I don't think it is navel gazing, what I would like to see is more of a focus on the job of a network like The Morning Show and the responsibilities that come along with that job in terms of telling the truth, in terms of maybe not passing opinion off as fact, which is something that we will no doubt see next year when the big news networks go at one another. And so that is something that I would like to see tackled, to be quite honest with you. I am someone that, when it comes to joining a social media network, I block all of the major news outlets from my timeline because I like to have a kind of a siphoned experience in that sense, a place to get away from it all whilst also being informed on the topics that I'm interested in. From a character's point of view, I'll be honest with you, I think the biggest character in the whole series is UBA as an organization. And so I would love to see Bradley be okay. But I also understand that not every story ends happily. And maybe that is something that a show like this can get away with because it is seeped in reality compared to any other narrative-driven story. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to whenever season 4 of The Morning Show comes. I think we may have a little while to wait because I do think we've got to wait for next November to be done and over with before they know really the story that they want to tell with season 4, which, as you alluded to, is probably going to be the 4th and final season of The Morning Show, unless something dramatic changes. You, of course, do have the opportunity to check out all 3 seasons of The Morning Show in their entirety, now streaming across all of your screens on Apple TV+. Once again, lots and lots to check out on Apple TV across Apple's original series, podcasts, and of course, there's still so much to delve in across Apple Music and Apple Arcade, along with Apple Fitness Plus. But we end each week with our Up Next picks from across the TV app. This week, a show that I don't think is getting cancelled anytime. I think this is a safe pick, Devon. I don't know how long until you're going to get annoyed with me saying that you're cursed. What have you got for us this week, Devon?
Well, Sigmund, I'll let you keep making that joke into my golden years. I'll put up with it, so don't worry. My pick this week is a new reality show from a long-living franchise that, as you said, I don't think is going away anytime soon. If it does end next week, Sigmund, then I'll admit that I really am cursed. My pick this week is The Golden Bachelor, brand new series from the creators of The Bachelor. My wife got me into these shows when we started dating a few years back, and I've just become completely engrossed in the world. There's just, a whole community of people who've been on the show, who continue to interact on social media. They'll come back for spinoffs of the show and things like that. But this is a totally different territory for the series. This is the first time they're bringing in people in their 60s and 70s instead of their 20s to try to find the loves of their life. And so this season follows Gary, who is a widower. He's in his 70s, very sweet man, very likable. And he joins up with this group of ladies and starts getting to know them and trying to figure out if one of them might be the love of his life. It very much follows the Bachelor format of, the rose ceremonies and the group dates and all that kind of stuff. But because the participants are a little more mature and bring a little more life experience to the show, it does have a totally different dynamic. It's very sweet. I tear up just about every episode because there's just so much sweetness to it. These are people, a lot of them, who have experienced that one true love that you get in your life and then have lost their partners. And so they have an appreciation for what that looks like. And now they're just looking for someone to, enjoy their old age with and just, to laugh with and meet each other's grandkids and things like that. So Golden Bachelor, it's really hooked me. It pulls on the heartstrings in a way that, maybe the other shows I watch more for the drama, but this one's definitely more for the heart. It's getting ready to wrap up its first season. I think the finale is next week. So if you're interested in catching up on it, it's available on Hulu.
I'm hoping to be in season 2 myself. I want to be the next Golden. Yeah, I'm 33, but
in the Bachelor world, that's considered pretty old, actually. I think we'd all be considered
I've got the back
too old
pain
to be contestants at this point.
Qualify. Yeah.
Likewise.
Well, Sigmund, what is your up next pick for this week?
Well, I've got 2 picks. They both come from the same studio, of course, my favourite, A24. but two very different picks. The first is a film that's finally coming over to the TV app this week. It's called Dicks the Musical, about two self-obsessed businessmen that discover that they're long-lost identical twins and come together to plot the reunion of their eccentric divorced parents. This has lots of musical goings on, is very kooky, very out there. One of my most memorable cinematic experiences, made me laugh a lot, and I think that's much needed in this world. Of course, not for everyone, but there are a couple of characters in this that I think you're going to love. Alongside, of course, Nathan Lane, who was also in one of my favourite films this year, Beau is Afraid. So definitely check that out. And my second pick is a new series, courtesy of A24, coming to Showtime this week. It's called The Curse, starring Emma Stone and Nathan Fielder as Whitney and Asher Siegel, a newlywed couple struggling to bring their vision for eco-conscious housing to the small community of Espanola. But their efforts are complicated by an alleged curse and an eccentrically flawed reality TV producer, Dougie, who sees opportunity in their story. As the series unfolds, the couple find themselves caught in a mysterious web of ethical and moral grey zones, all while trying to keep their relationship afloat and conceive a child. So lots and lots going on here. Emma Stone, of course, is a darling. Cannot wait to check this out. Premiering on Showtime this week. So lots of A24 magic. Lots of different picks here. I cannot wait to hear what you've got for us, Zach. What is your up next pick this week?
I like you've got a couple. And one is a fairly new movie from 1969, Easy Rider. I watched for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So starring Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper. This is like the classic motorcycle movie as a thing that sort of explores the culture in the 60s and early 70s. And just you kind of have someone go, you have a couple of riders going from like LA to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. So, you know, I'm a big motorcycle person. I'm a big New Orleans and Mardi Gras person, so it's like it just spoke to me. And honestly, I mean, I don't want to say too much about the movie and the plot because it's kind of like, what is this movie and what is this plot, even to the very end. It was one of those movies where I immediately wanted to go back and like learn everything about how this was put together, like what it meant at the time that it was made and everything. And, you know, some of the elements are that I think it was one of the first movies with so-called found music, where it's music that's already known, but they incorporate it heavily throughout the movie versus all original stuff. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then you've got a very young Jack Nicholson character.
Oh, yeah.
Who is just, if you're a Jack Nicholson fan and you haven't seen Easy Rider, you just got to see it. And then the other movie is something I actually haven't seen yet, but it's in my up next queue. And it won't surprise you, Sigmund. It is Monsters of California. It's from Tom DeLonge and Blink-182. So this is his directorial debut of, you know, straight fiction. He's been involved in some movies. Like there's sort of a movie called Love several years ago that was like 2001: A Space Odyssey-esque, and, you know, a big art film. This one, I haven't seen it yet, but I think it's much more digestible from the trailers I've seen. Maybe there's some debate about, like, is it a good movie or not? You know, again, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But it looks fun, though. And it kind of, if you're familiar with Tom DeLonge and Blink-182 and sort of like his involvement in early Blink-182, it explores a lot of his interests, you know, in terms of sci-fi, aliens, Bigfoot, you know, teenagers, punk rock kids in California, experiencing all these extraterrestrial events and the relationships thereabouts. Haven't yet seen it, but it's available to buy or rent in the TV app, and so it's on my up next queue.
I have to say, this was completely off my radar, so I'm looking forward to checking this out this weekend myself. Yeah. Fantastic picks. I'll tell you what, I'm still waiting with bated breath for the Angels and Airways documentary, which is being put together by Pete McKinnon, I think. Hopefully we'll see that not before too long.
Yeah, there are rumors right now of maybe a live tour video release in December. Just a rumor, but Angel and Airwaves fans are clinging to it, me included. There have been at least 2 Blink-182 films that have been like documentaries that have been produced and canceled because of things like the band breaking up and everything. And in this case, Peter McKinnon was doing the like Angel and Airwaves comeback tour movie, and then Blink-182 got back together, and Angel and Airwaves became the back burner in Tom DeLonge's life. And so I think that's something that he's got to be eager to release to the world. And so I'm hoping that that's what this rumored maybe like live concert and video release is, because it would be a treat to see.
Zach, it's been such a pleasure having you back on Magic Rays of Light. Where can everyone find you, and do you have anything that you would like to promote?
Sure. I'm writing every day at 9to5mac.com. Not sure what else I'll do in the future, but I'm 9to5mac is my thing for the last decade, and no plans to change that. You used to do a lot with podcasting. I was the host of the 9to5mac Happy Hour podcast for 8 years or so, and sort of dedicated my attention to writing and doing like the core thing that is 9to5mac, and kind of starting from scratch in that regard. So it's good to be back on the microphone and talking to you guys.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Zach, it's been a pleasure having you on. I think that's all for this week. We want to thank everyone listening for tuning in. Of course, we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback, so be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and review there. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes, or you can email the show or send us an iMessage to mrolfm@screentimes.net. We'll be back next week with the highly anticipated debut of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and we'll see you next time.